Hi there everyone, Lars here from Camille's Harem, back again with another Rings of Power review and analysis, brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers, because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And, oh boy, this was a rather interesting episode to get into after the massive battle and the creation of Mount Doom in the previous episode, Udun. And I am really at a loss for words, in part because I felt like this episode just kind of washed over me. I had to sit back later and really think, what did I just watch? And I'll be honest, so little of it actually held my attention to any sort of degree that I ended up getting up, leaving halfway through the episode, hanging out with my family, watching a bit of the Great British Baking Show, and talking over details with some people for my upcoming book later this year. So finally I was like, well, I've done all those things. Let's go back to the Rings of Power. And again, it just kind of washed over me. And really, it would be, I think, too simplistic to say that it was a boring episode. Rather, instead, it's an episode that failed to do what it was trying to do. This episode was all about survivor's guilt and coming to terms with the consequences of character decisions. And honestly, I love that kind of approach. That's something that I can really sink my teeth into. And yet, it continuously failed again and again and again with that approach that I just lost interest. I can't say that it's just simply boring, but rather it failed to do what it was supposed to do, and so it couldn't be engaging despite its material. But I will be getting into a lot of that once I start doing my breakdown of the episode, doing my spoilery review, and then diving, of course, into the analysis. You guys basically know the drill if you've seen this before. If not, what I like to do in these videos is I like to, of course, have my little introduction at the beginning, then I do a spoilery overview of all the things that happened within the episode, at least the big stuff that I can remember. Then I look at the lore as Tolkien wrote it, and I see what kinds of accuracies or inaccuracies there are, how the show has used or abused Tolkien. I then have a look at why Tolkien wrote what he wrote, and then I judge the episode based on the assumption that that's just all original material. And if this were a completely original story, how does it hold up away from what Tolkien wrote? Because honestly, the name Tolkien being attached to the Rings of Power has really dragged it down. So does it have any sort of value as a story when it's separated completely from Tolkien? And then finally, because this is a channel for novice writers by novice writers, I then have a look at what kind of lessons we can learn from looking at this episode of Rings of Power. Now, before I go much further with this video, I should bring up my most recent community post here on YouTube, bringing up one of the more recent interviews with J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, where they called a lot of the people who are criticizing their works patently evil. I think we should put into context that they were especially referring to people who were using rather colorful language and profanity to describe how they felt about the Rings of Power. And yet, when I had a look at what these people had to say, well, they had a lot of good points. It's not how I would have said it. And of course, people are all up in arms about they are calling us evil. And really, I'd like to take a different look at what we've learned recently from J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, and it's that, well, they're probably more novice than I am when it comes to creating and interacting with people. They've been in the industry for well over a decade, but have never gotten any project off the ground. And as such, they've just kind of been meandering around, making script after script after script, making basically pitch ideas without ever having to refine any of those ideas. Despite what they say about big names and big IPs and scripts being done and directors were chosen, casts were chosen, and then nothing happened. Oh, woe is us that we have such bad luck. And I say, for one thing, well, that is the industry. But another thing is this, is that you should always constantly be working on refining your craft. And I compare that kind of to when I first got started with pitching my novel, Knights of Hallicrues. I wrote to tons of publishing companies, making all kinds of queries, doing basically all kinds of really ridiculous things. Every single company had a completely different approach for how they wanted to receive my book, and that took weeks to go through all that, and it took months to hear back from everyone. While I was waiting, I was continuously writing other stories, but also going back to the book that I just pitched to all these people, and I kept on editing it. I kept on working on it because I knew it wasn't yet a perfect story. And as I was writing up the queries, I began to realize, ooh, you know what, this chapter isn't quite right. I'm going to fix that on up. And so it was a constant editing process. And as a result of constantly working on this book and then working on other books on the side, it really helped to refine my craft as an author. Now then, I don't know what J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay have ultimately done within their own careers. I can't claim any sort of insider knowledge, and as such, I can't pass full final judgment on them. But looking at the show Rings of Power, and I've said it multiple times, and I'm going to say it again, it reads as a first draft. And so I can only assume that these guys have really only ever written pitches and have never really dedicated themselves actually writing a full fleshed out story, let alone a good full fleshed out script. And they even say as much in their interview with the Hollywood Reporter, saying, yeah, you know what, we've learned that all scenes should somehow connect to the overall plot, and maybe you shouldn't just drag things out for a really long time. And I'm like, really? And I've passed that quote along to other people, and not even people who write, and they're like, that's a duh, that's a given. I know that, and I don't write stories, is what they say. So, oh boy, J.D. Payne, Patrick McKay, really, you shouldn't be throwing around any sort of names at people, calling anyone patently evil when you've got a lot of work to do to improve your stories in the first place, and I think you need to take some time and reflect on how you approach criticism. But with that being said, like I put into last week's analysis and review, you can be doing so much more with your time, experiencing way better stories that stimulate your imagination in your brain and take you to fantastic places. And so again, I come to you with 5 recommendations for stories that I think you guys will really enjoy. My first recommendation is the manga Make the Exorcist Fall in Love. If you are into dark, gritty fantasy, or if you're someone who really enjoys like weird, wacky takes on religion, especially Christianity, this is the story for you, as it follows a very mysterious young boy who is raised within the Catholic Church to become a priest, and as he grows older, he is chosen as a warrior of God to fight against the 7 incarnations of the devil. The setup is incredible. The story really dives into how the war between good and evil is basically everlasting, because you kill one variation of the devil, and that will just go to hell, reincarnate, and then come back again. The takes on the 7 deadly sins is really unique, and not in a stretched kind of way where like, what? I can't really see that, but it all makes sense how the 7 deadly sins present themselves, how the devil is split into 7 different personalities to embody each sin is a really neat concept, and how this priest, this warrior of God, is able to, like, he's incredible. He has only one weakness though, and that is that he's known nothing else other than being a warrior of God. And as such, the devil hopes to undermine him and his faith by presenting him with temptations of a normal life. And it's a really, really neat story. I highly recommend the manga Make the Exorcist Fall in Love. Now then, shifting gears entirely and going in a completely different direction. If you've watched this episode of The Rings of Power and you're like, you know what? Just like you, Lars, I'm not feeling the emotions here. I feel like it was trying to do something grand and it ultimately failed, and we're going to get into probably why it did fail. Well, allow me to introduce you then to a book that will have you feeling all kinds of emotions and really take you, I think, to some really beautiful and personal places, and also maybe expose some of the inner darkness and inner trauma that you personally have felt and give you messages of hope. It is the book The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackey. And holy cow, this book is beautiful. Everyone that I know who has read it has cried. And not like an ugly cry, but like a beautiful cry where you're just all like, thank you. That is a story that I needed to hear these kinds of messages. It's such a beautiful story. It's really about a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse, all four of which have their own little stories and insights on life, and it's such a beautiful book. My third recommendation, if you look at a character like Theo from this episode and you're like, I'm definitely not getting teenage hero vibes from any of this. I'm getting angsty teenager and I'm not enjoying this. I don't see a hero in this kid. If you're looking for a good teenage hero or even an ensemble of teenage heroes, I encourage you to read the book series Skyward from Brandon Sanderson. This series follows a gang of young starfighter cadets who are chosen to go into this very dangerous program to save humanity from these aliens who routinely every week send down invasions onto this junk planet to wipe out the last vestiges of humanity in the galaxy. As far as we know, Earth has been destroyed, humans have been hunted down, the last of humanity is on this junkyard planet, where they have to scrap together fighter planes and jets and special spaceships from whatever they have available and fight these well-prepared, very versatile aliens who are hell-bent on destroying them. It is a fantastic series. It will take you to places you didn't expect, and it's full of wonderful teenage characters that fill the entire spectrum of good to bad, from sociable to antisocial, from quirky to cool. It's got it all. It's a great series. And if you feel like The Rings of Power is just not scratching your fantasy itch, you want a good, strong fantasy story with a wide, expansive world, incredible lore. Do you want elves who are really ethereal but also feel relatable? And oh my gosh, I can't hold back any longer. The Dragon Prince. It is just such a great story. Binge seasons 1 through 3. You will love it. The Dragon Prince comes with so many fantastic characters. It's a very diverse cast and it feels real. It feels earned. All of the characters, from heroes to villains, are phenomenal. The humor takes a little bit of getting used to in the first season, but once it hits its stride, it is wonderful. The action in season 3 puts so many other adult shows to shame. It really goes all out, and there are just, there's so many great relationships, so many great characters, so many quest lines, and there's such a vast world to explore that we're going to explore soon here in season 4 for The Dragon Prince. So if you haven't seen it yet and you really want to get into a great fantasy series, you can spend your time with The Dragon Prince. You will not regret it. My last recommendation for a good story would be to check out my book Knights of Hallicruz. It is the first book in my series, The Legend of the Ten Lords. I recently released the sequel, which is The Dark Rebellion, but I definitely want to recommend my book Knights of Hallicruz because I will bring this up later on here in my analysis that some of the things that the Rings of Power wish to do with its main characters in this episode, I do the exact same stuff in my book, and I feel like I really capture the essence of survivor's guilt, feeling weighed down with the consequences of combat and of your actions. Even if your actions lead to something good, if your actions still lead to people's deaths, that's going to weigh heavily on a person's mind and soul. And so I really put some of my characters kind of through the ringer, but in ways that I hope are going to be relatable to my readers, as well as introducing you to a fantastic world that really embodies the niche of portal fantasy, where people fall asleep and they get transported to a world made of imagination. And that sounds fantastic, and it is fantastic, until you realize that the villains that they're going up against can also use imagination against them. And there's so much to explore in the Legend of the Ten Lords series. I really hope that you give it a try. I know I'm kind of being a little bit self-indulgent right here and pushing my own stories. First Bleeds Team of Steel and now Knights of Hallicruz. But if you wish to support good news stories, then please check out my works. I think you'll really enjoy them if you give them a chance. Okay, so that does it for my 5 recommendations for stories that you can enjoy and take you to fantastic places other than having to deal with the quagmire of the Rings of Power. And really, I'm not going to dig much more in this video into attacking J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay because honestly, I've already said a lot of my piece about these guys in previous videos. Of course, with the final episode coming out next week, I will have my final conclusion about the show in general as well as what the writers have given to us. But honestly, my advice would be, especially after looking at what these guys have said, learn how to deal with criticism. It's going to come your way if you're a creator, and you have to figure out how to deal with it in a healthy way. And lashing out or being passive aggressive is not good. So that being said, let's dive into the spoilery overview of the Rings of Power episode 7. This episode doesn't really have a whole lot happening. Looking at the big stuff going on, now that Mount Doom has erupted and is filling the lands, the Southlands, which will at the end of this episode be called Mordor, filling them with ash, smoke, the very air you breathe is a poisonous fume. All of those things are going down right here, and basically what happens, Galadriel gets up almost as if she's been beauty sleeping in Cheeto dust, and goes on and tries to find the other survivors of this massive eruption. And yes, by real world standards, they should all be dead, but this is fantasy, so we're gonna move on. What is really annoying and dumb is that she finds Theo, and she's like, "We will find the others. Come now." And she's like commanding people to come to her. Right next to her are people struggling to get out of wreckage. They're struggling to save people from burning buildings. And Galadriel walks off with Theo into the burning woods, leaving everyone alone. What just happened there? And so this leaves everyone else to try to save the other people. Queen Muriel tries to save people from the inn, which was the keep. It was a horrible idea to put people into this inn because it's burning. People are dying inside of this inn. Ashes fall into her face, but not into her eyes. I checked. They don't fall into her eyes. They fall onto her mouth, and as a result, she will go blind. Isildur's wimpy, plump friend who said he had already had experienced enough fighting to last him a lifetime is crushed to death by a falling building. Isildur himself vanishes into the fires and smoke of the smoldering town as everyone else trudges on out. Halbrand goes missing until the end of the episode when he's discovered with a bad gut wound that we're not exactly sure how he got, but he got it, and he now needs elvish healing in order to save him. Bronwyn and Arondir go missing for a while. Arondir is perfectly fine, so too is Bronwyn. She seems to have recovered from not one, but 2 arrow wounds like it was nothing. She's walking and acting totally fine here in this episode. Maybe she has the elvish magic for all we know. And Elendil tries to guide everyone out of the Southlands and to the Númenórean war camp, which was made outside of Mordor, so that way they can gather everyone together and figure out what to do next. Galadriel and Theo go on a very long walk through the woods, hide away from orcs who are hunting for survivors, and they have long conversations about guilt, about revenge, about the war within. And one of the things that is a real problem within this episode is that Galadriel realizes that there are consequences to her decisions. Go figure. And she is finally questioning, was revenge actually worth this? I mean, she even brings up like how Finrod is dead. She brings up that Celeborn is dead. I don't think he's actually dead, and I'm going to get to why that is here in a little bit. And she's all like, now that she looks around, this quest for revenge has led to just so many people dying in this entire beautiful land being wiped out by Adar and his crazy plan. And so she begins to question, was I right? And the annoying thing is that from Theo to the Queen Regent to Bronwyn to Halbrand, no, Galadriel, you were correct, and you have put us onto the right path. And Galadriel's like, yeah, by the end of the episode, she's like, yes, that was right. And I'm going to go to King Gilgalad, and I'm going to make sure that the elves are ready to join up with the Númenóreans so we can wipe out the orcs who come to Mordor. Huzzah! And what could have been a great turning point for Galadriel as a character is squandered by the story yet again telling her that she's right, she's perfect, and that she's not at fault for what has happened. Instead, many of the other characters actually assume the blame. And Theo is now set on his own quest for revenge, and he's been given a sword, and we now get that little bit there from the trailer where someone's holding up a sword. That's Theo, and he's ready, apparently. He's got survivor's guilt, which quickly turns into a lust for revenge, which could be very interesting to pursue, except that all the scenes with Theo are dominated by Galadriel spouting out hypocritical wisdom and basically overcoming any sort of grief that she should be feeling. And this isn't me simply trying to bash on the episode. That's actually in the episode, spelled out very clearly for the audience to get across multiple conversations. Ugh, that really didn't work for me. And it's one of the reasons why I just feel like trying to go for survivor's guilt and for anger and for revenge in this episode ultimately falls flat, because the character who should be feeling this most poignantly, Galadriel, is told she was right, and in the end reverts all the way back to who she was in the previous episode. So there really is no progression for her character whatsoever. When we look at the Númenóreans themselves, the Queen Regent, she loses her eyesight, and it has emboldened her now to come and get revenge against the orcs. Númenor will not leave Middle-earth behind, and the borders will be opened, and Númenor is going to come and save Middle-earth. Meanwhile, Bronwyn and Arondir are going to lead the Southlanders out to basically what's supposed to be Gondor, and they are going to settle probably Osgiliath, which has been apparently abandoned by the Númenóreans. It's an ancient settlement that they just let go, and they are going to found Gondor. That's basically what's going to happen. And Halbrand, as I said, goes off with Galadriel to get healing. Elendil, for his part, oh my gosh, this is actually the best part of the whole episode. The actor who's playing Elendil does an absolutely phenomenal job actually capturing many of the emotions that the character should be feeling. Isildur has gone missing, and he wants so badly to go find his son and to confirm whether he's dead or alive, but he holds to his duty to help the queen because the queen is wounded. The queen needs guidance, needs assistance. He blames himself for a lot of what has happened, not just to individuals, but just in general, because he realizes that bringing Galadriel to Númenor set off a domino series of events that led to this disaster, especially for the Númenóreans, and he feels like it's time to go back to Númenor and just turn their backs on Middle-earth. And of course, when the queen says that that's not going to be the case, he is absolutely distraught because this is just going to mean more death and loss, and for what? He can't see what this will really all lead to in the end. It's very well done right there. Meanwhile, other things that are happening in this episode, Durin and Elrond go to find Mithril because Durin III refuses to let the elves have any Mithril. It is confirmed in a really awkward moment when Elrond's like, well, I guess since we're not going to get any Mithril, I'm just going to go back home and die. Hey, because that's going to be a thing. And he gives back the Mithril to Durin. Durin flips it across the table. It lands next to the blighted leaf and immediately heals the leaf of all evil. Why this little bit of Mithril cannot be given for elves to hold to or to sniff until all the evil is expunged from them and they receive the light of the Eldar, I don't really know. But Elrond and Durin decide to go behind the king's back, go mining for Mithril. They discover a huge Mithril lode deep within Moria that is just ready and waiting to be accessed, but then the king shuts it all down. He says that he will not risk his people to save the elves, especially because he believes that the elves should be doomed to fade and to die. He's basically condemning an entire race to die by just ignoring them. Of course, this is going to set the king and the prince at odds with each other, and Durin III basically disowns his son, and so Disa comes on in and basically tells Durin that they're going to have to stage a political coup against the king, take over the kingdom, get the mithril, and send it to the elves in order to save them. And Elrond is finally exiled from Moria, and it looks like it's curtains for the elves, but of course we know that mithril is going to be access for the elves to save the elves. And as the king orders the mithril lode to be sealed up, well, he tosses the now healed leaf down and it flies deep into Moria, where the Balrog is at. Cue Member Berry, and we get nothing. Then we go on over to the Harfoots, and hallelujah, the Meteor Man finally has learned how to pull a cart correctly. But not only that, he uses his magic to heal a tree, but not before some bad luck nearly crushes Nori's little sister, and Nori's like, no, I brought this horrible big man into our midst. We must get rid of him. And so the Meteor Man, he takes the hint and he leaves. And with the cultists then on his heels, they arrive as the hobbits suddenly realize that this Meteor Man has cast actually a fantastic spell and has made the glade incredibly fruitful, and now there's apples everywhere. But the cultists are not happy with the Harfoots challenging them about being in their camp, and so they proceed to burn the entire camp. After the glade already had been smashed by bits of rock hurled by Mount Doom earlier on in the episode. So the Harfoots are kind of having a really bad time. Their entire way of life has been burnt down, and they finally decide to do something decent, and that is go after the Meteor Man and save him from the cultists. There's actually some interesting stuff here in this particular subplot. The problem is that the Harfoots have been established as such despicable characters who willfully let their own people die, which is something that no nomadic group would ever do, that while these changes with the Harfoots finally showing any sense of mercy and selflessness on their part was welcomed, it felt completely out of character for these disgusting hobbits. And I didn't want them to really go on any sort of adventure. And in this episode ripped out so many lines from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. They completely, they take the Council of Elrond and they basically make it a little hobbit meeting. They absolutely do, and it's completely made of appropriated lines that they just shifted around some words. It was embarrassing to watch because it was such a blatant ripoff of a movie that did it far better. And it wasn't just in this one scene, but across multiple scenes where they completely stole lines from Gandalf, from Elrond, from Aragorn, from Legolas, from Arwen, from Frodo, from Bilbo. So many appropriated lines in this episode. It was shocking and appalling. And I was like, what is going on here? So ultimately, by the end of the episode, we have a gang of hobbits going out to find the Meteor Man and save him from the cultists. Elrond has been banished from Moria. Durin the Fourth is going to conspire with his wife Disa to basically undermine the king and reopen Moria to the elves and get the mithril to the elves before the elves die. The Númenóreans are returning to Númenor to get an even larger army to now come against the orcs, who have rallied around Adar and have now renamed the Southlands into Mordor. The ending shot is completely silly. It's something like right out of the 80s and not in a good way with how the name is changed. I laughed out loud because I was like, what did you do with that final shot? It was bad. It was really, really bad. And yeah, when we had brought all the characters together and it seemed like the story was finally going to be cohesive in some kind of way, we're splitting up the characters once again, and this is going to be really detrimental to the story in the long run. The last episode at least had some sort of action and some good through line through it because we had finally brought so many stories together in one place. But now we've scattered them again, and that's really going to mess around with the overall pacing. So that was the spoilery overview right there. Whew, quite a lot of ultimately nothing to cover, which is sad to say, and it's sad to say because, again, there's a lot of potential in this episode, but it was wasted because, well, I'll get to that in the analysis. But first, let's talk about the lore. what kind of lore was used and abused by the showrunners here? Actually, not a whole lot. Most of the lore has already been covered in my previous reviews and analyses. The Mithril, of course, is not made from Silmarils. It cannot cure darkness. The Eldar cannot lose their light. They cannot lose their immortality. And the elves and the dwarves were actually friendly with each other during the Second Age, especially thanks to Celebrimbor. A lot of this stuff is absolutely fabricated by the showrunners. Ultimately, this episode felt unique, actually, because this episode was so detached from Tolkien's lore, almost down to the bare bones, that it felt like I was watching truly an original story, which made it actually, at first, one of the more interesting episodes in the entire series, except that it fell flat on its face. Ugh. Now then, there are some matters of the lore that they did use and abuse. First of which is this: Bronwyn basically leading the Southlanders to settle Gondor. No. There were multiple kingdoms of men all throughout the south and the east. When the Númenóreans came, they settled these lands and formed colonies. This would be something very similar actually to what the ancient Athenians did, where they set up quote-unquote colonies where there were already city-states. Basically what they said is, hey, guess what? You guys can continue to exist, but now you're going to pay us taxes. If you don't pay us taxes, bad things could happen. Like, we might not protect you from your enemies. We might not protect you from ourselves! Oh, good old Athens. And that's basically what Númenor does in its darker days later on. But Númenor settled a large part of the south and built up massive fortifications, mostly to help contain Sauron within Mordor. And this will lead to the creation of Minas Tirith, which is one of the guard towers, ultimately, which then grows into a massive city in order to support the large garrison that is opposing Mordor, as well as other places like Minas Ithil, which is another smaller garrison in order to check all of the different exits out of Mordor. So, yeah, Bronwyn is not the one who discovers Gondor and sets up that kingdom. It had already been set into motion by smaller kingdoms that had existed. The Númenóreans came and colonized the area and condensed everything into large cities and garrisons in order to oppose Sauron and his armies. That right there is, in a very brief nutshell, the beginnings of Gondor. The only other way in which this episode completely got the lore wrong was when Galadriel mentioned the deaths of Finrod and of her husband, Celeborn. Apparently Celeborn is dead. Now then, I've already covered at length what happened actually to Finrod. Finrod had a much better story according to Tolkien, and the guy's just an absolute boss in Chad. Everyone loves Finrod. When it comes to Celeborn, Celeborn is a very interesting character as the husband of Galadriel. And no, he is never killed. He is a valiant warrior, not just some dork, as Galadriel called him, a silver clam. Can this show not emasculate good male characters? Celeborn is a really cool and interesting guy with a very curious history, being not from the Noldor, but from the Teleri, falling in love with the beautiful and powerful Galadriel, and he's basically her childhood sweetheart. He is a great politician, he is a great leader, he's a great warrior, and he is most certainly one of the wisest and most powerful elves of the Third Age. He and Galadriel are like the ultimate power couple of the Third Age. So Celeborn obviously should not be dead, and really the show is baiting fans with like, hoo, Celeborn is dead, just you wait until we bring him back. And already a lot of people are like, so what kind of mystery box is going to be used, or what sort of magic is going to be used to bring Celeborn back? Celeborn isn't dead. No, he's not dead. We didn't see a body to help confirm it like what happened with Finrod. Galadriel just says that she never saw Celeborn again when he went off to battle. There was no body, which probably means that at some point in time, Galadriel is going to rescue her husband, and that's probably going to get Halbrand / Sauron really upset and jealous and lead to shenanigans. So what can I then say about the lore that Tolkien wrote? What can we learn from this right here? Tolkien was a student of history. Things don't just happen. Nothing happens in a vacuum when it comes to history. And with just kind of this very offhandish comment of Bronwyn saying, we're going to go to the abandoned settlement / colony of the Númenóreans, which is clearly where Minas Tirith or Exgiliath is, and we're going to settle that, and then we know that this is going to lead eventually into the founding of Gondor. That stuff like that doesn't actually really happen in history. In order to found kingdoms, there are multiple people who take part in this. It's lots of communities coming together over a wide territory, and also usually it's multiple cultures coming together and then becoming one homogenized culture. Tolkien understood this, and if you're willing to go through the long history of the different regions, and especially the kingdoms of men within Tolkien's work, you will see this at play. Tolkien wrote exhaustively all these different backstories and histories to the many kingdoms of men, and they are wonderful and fantastic. And again, this is something that the showrunners actually have legal access to. This is stuff that they could have actually drawn upon to use. Gondor has a very rich history to it, especially in the Third Age, but, well, they just didn't tap into it. And as a result, honestly, what now appears to be the beginnings of the Kingdom of Gondor feels really lackluster, when really that's anything but the case. A kingdom that is going to rise up to be one of the most important in all of Middle-earth? Well, there is quite the story to it. History is a series of important stories that are threaded together across multiple generations, the consequences of one generation's choices leading on into the next, and the different conflicts and people that just bind it all together. History is fascinating, and Tolkien put all of that history into his stories. When I look at The Rings of Power, it's a fantasy story devoid of history, and they so desperately want it to be epic fantasy. One of the interesting things is this: Tolkien established more so than really any other author before him just how important it was to have history be a part of fantasy, because fantasy feels more alive when there's a history to it, when it feels like generations matter, when it feels like these ancient ruins are actually significant, when we learn about lost spells and lost languages, lost kingdoms, lost heroes. There are stories behind it. They're not just simply MacGuffins or convenient plot contrivances to make sure that the heroes win. No, history is a living story, and history within a story helps to make that story feel more alive. Tolkien understood this. Tolkien put it into his stories. If you're going to write fantasy, that's something that you should consider. What is the history within your story? So, shifting gears, let's talk about this episode as if Tolkien never existed. The Lord of the Rings didn't happen, it's never been written, and The Rings of Power is a completely original idea. How does this episode hold up? Well, contrary to what I think a lot of other people are going to say, this episode actually had all the parts. It really absolutely did. As we begin to see how people are suffering from the consequences of a volcano exploding, yes, again, a pyroclastic wave should have wiped them all out, like what happened in Pompeii. This is fantasy. We're going to move on right here. But we see all of these different characters now suffering from physical, mental, or spiritual consequences of the battle that happened. This is good. A battle is made stronger by its lasting consequences. And that's something I definitely advocate for. And what we see is that the events within this episode are meant to really definitely push the larger war that is to come between the Númenóreans and the forces of evil, leading up to the creation of the Rings of Power, and then everything that comes with that when Sauron finally reveals himself eventually to the heroes. So that's honestly good. We get good progression for the overall plot. The problem is that this episode wasn't focusing on overall progression. Instead, this episode really wanted to be a character study for all of the heroes who had participated in the fights. For one thing, we should have gotten way more of Adar than we did just right there at the very end. We should have seen how the villain immediately responded to these events. We didn't get anything there with the villain. So therefore, this episode should really heavily focus on the heroes and what's going on with them. Well, the problem is this. Theo gets no real character progression whatsoever. And the reason for that is we go from survivor's guilt to a desire for revenge, for a desire to be noble, and none of it really connects. What is supposed to persuade Theo to finally try to become a hero are the wise words from Galadriel. The problem is that all of her advice is 100% hypocritical because of the things that she has done in all the previous episodes and where she ends up at the end of this episode. Once again, on the path for revenge. So this whole idea of being wise and of seeking to root out the evil within you and that wars are fought both without and within, screw all of that. Did the writers really not pay attention to what they're doing with these characters? Theo is being led about on the faulty, hollow words of a hypocrite, and it's not even really, like, I can't even say that he exercises any real agency at all in this episode. He becomes a loyal pawn to Galadriel, all the meanwhile telling Galadriel that she's perfect and totally not in the wrong, that she is the hero. And then the queen reinforces that she's the hero. Galadriel, who I was happy to see her grappling with, holy crap, I did things wrong. There are consequences to my decisions. I got so many innocent people killed. Holy cow, that was good. And by the end of it, she's done. She's accepted all of that. The queen has forgiven her, so she's forgiven herself, and we're back on that road for revenge. Hallelujah. And when she says, I'll go to King Gil-galad and answer for what happened, she says this in such a Karen way, and the way in which she orders people about as they are dying. It's just awful. There's no sympathy for this character whatsoever. There's no emotional growth for her whatsoever. And then the fact that we don't really get anything for Bronwyn or Arondir or for Halbrand or for Isildur, all of that is just lost. This leaves us then, as far as the consequences of the previous episode go, we are left with Elendil. And let me tell you this, the actor for Elendil is phenomenal. I think that he read through the script and realized that this is a story of anger and survivor's guilt, and he captured it perfectly. And when you look at how so many of the other, like, little subplots for these characters, their acting is wooden, the direction was bland, and the dialogue was contradictory at best. Elendil, the actor who played Elendil, still managed to sell a bad script with phenomenal acting. Holy cow, I love how we see him just absolutely hollow and distraught at the destruction wrought by Mount Doom, and how he's holding out hope that he'll see Isildur. But then when Isildur's buddy returns and there's no word for Isildur, he's like, my son is lost. I've lost my son, I've lost my wife, I've lost my son, I've lost so many people to this battle, and for what? And then we see him grow angry, and he hates how he rescued Galadriel and how he started this chain of events that has led to this moment. He feels guilty for it. We get some good survivor's guilt. We get some great anger, and he's ready to turn his back upon Middle-earth. And then when the Queen Regent forgives Galadriel and basically says, like, look, you actually have nothing to actually be sorry for, because you were right. No, save your pity for our enemies, for when we come with our armies. And then she commands Elendil to attend her, and then he doesn't say anything. I do not believe that the director, after showing such a lackluster direction throughout this entire episode, had the brains to actually craft this scene. I believe that the actor actually said, hey, look, can we try this out? I'm not going to immediately respond to the queen. I want you to have a shot of me turned away from her, and I'm trying to cover up the fact that I'm crying with grief. Holy cow, this is the one moment where emotion landed this episode. That was well done. And why was it well done? It was well done because we had plenty of time to fully process an arc of grief for this character, and it remained consistent. There was no, oh, no, you were right all along, you were totally fine. Or, I'm listening to hollow words from a hypocrite, and I'm now going to decide to do something. Or, I've lost my eyesight. This is a really bad thing. So I'm going to lead more soldiers in war. I am sorry, but there's only one blind general in all of history who actually did a good job. And Queen Muriel, you are not that guy. So the consistency of Elendil's character throughout this episode allowed his moments to land really well, and just on top of that, really fantastic acting. I did really like where we were going with the elves and the dwarves. The animosity between the two races is bearing all kinds of poisonous fruit. I really enjoyed the interactions between Durin the Third and Durin the Fourth. I really want this father and son relationship to work out well, but it's clear that the father is manipulating his son because the father has his own beliefs of how the world should work, and he's totally fine with letting the elves die out. It's a very harsh decision, and it's one that kind of makes sense if you think about how long this animosity is supposed to have lasted. The relationship between Elrond and Durin is still great. I really enjoyed that. The conversations between Disa and Durin were also really good. And again, the whole Moria subplot, minus the Mithril nonsense, is actually really good. Had the show focused more on this, you would have a very powerful political and emotional plot between two different races that are bound together through their hatred, but also through a very unlikely friendship. I really like what they're doing right here, but it's just not given enough room within the show to properly breathe and develop into something that could be a really great standalone subplot. And here's the thing, if we didn't know anything about Tolkien or the lore of Middle-earth or what have you, here's the thing, the cultists and the Balrog would mean absolute nonsense. It would be a true mystery box that is just aggravating. It's not even tantalizing, it's aggravating because we're being shown some really cool stuff and we're being given no explanation for it whatsoever. And as a result, it's hard to get invested in this fiery demon under the mountain, because we get just one little brief glimpse of it, and ultimately it's just like, well, you know what? Durin the Third is absolutely correct, and the elves should die. But wait a second, that's not what we should be thinking. So again, we have contradictions within the story. And what's up with these cultists? Okay, we get to see a little bit more of them, but we still have no understanding whatsoever of what they're really after or why. And so as a result, yeah. And the Meteor Man and his powers still, this is mystery box nonsense that is not going anywhere. And again, if we have Tolkien's lore, we can make comparisons and we can make some logical guesses about what the showrunners want to do. But if we took this as completely original material, there is nothing to work with here. And that's bad. If you are going to use magic and cults and big demons and the likes, you have to give your audience something to gnaw on, something that is context, that is lore, that is maybe a guess from the characters. You don't even have to give your audience the truth of what's going on, but you have to give them something to speculate on, something to chew on, something to think about, and to establish a foundation of understanding for this weird thing that you've introduced within your story. If you don't do that, it's just stuff. It's fluff being thrown at your audience, and it's basically then relying on the power of spectacle. The problem with the power of spectacle is that it's 50-50. It's hit or miss. It can land really well, or it can fall flat on its face and just utterly fall apart. And that's what we see here in this episode. We see a lot of spectacle that has no meaning. The Balrog and the cultists, no meaning whatsoever, because we have no original lore or a foundation to go off of with these characters. On top of that, all of the emotional weight for this episode really isn't there because of all the contradictory conversations and character arcs that are going on, and all of the characters who we should be seeing but aren't seeing. And so it's continuously falling flat because we're not getting the proper context, the proper development, the proper foundation of understanding. None of that is there. And especially then when we look at what's happening there with the Harfoots. Look, I am happy that we finally have these weird, dirty nomads figuring out that leaving people behind is probably not a good thing. It's shocking that it took you 1,000 years to figure it out, but thank goodness you're finally figuring it out. Though the motivating speeches really didn't feel motivating. It didn't actually even address really what is going on. And when Nori's father's all like, we are the Harfoots, with hearts even bigger than our feet, and we don't leave anyone behind. I'm sorry, but you do! You got left behind with your family. You were left behind to die. Who are you to say that you don't leave people behind and that we should save the Meteor Man? None of that made any sense. It was, again, another contradiction. Contradiction after contradiction after contradiction makes a story fall apart. And that's ultimately what happened here with this episode. It fell apart. It had all the right parts. It had the consequences for this massive disaster that happened down in the south that even reaches into the lives of the Harfoots. I liked that. But we quickly get over it by the end of the episode. And even a horrifying disfiguration is apparently going to be easily healed. Darkness is very easily healed by mithril, apparently. So all we need to do is actually just get our hands on a little bit of mithril and all of the elves are saved. Huzzah! And then, of course, we have the contradictions within what's happening inside the Durin family. Is the king actually correct? And the reason why the king might seem correct is because we have the demon down under the mountain, and because we don't have any context for what's really happening, because we're assuming that this is all original material, it seems like Durin the Third is 100% correct in condemning the elves to destruction, because otherwise they're all gonna die. They might as well save at least one kingdom, but no, because Durin the Fourth obviously has the clear moral high ground. This is frustrating right here. And one could argue, it creates conflict, but it's not a good conflict. It's a conflict where the choice is very simple, but the story makes it overly complicated by, again, not providing the proper context. I'm sorry, but that's the way that it is. Because, again, we're looking at this as original material. If we divorce ourselves completely from Tolkien and say, Tolkien never existed, the stuff was never written, then everything within this episode just starts falling apart because we don't have a foundation. So, coming now finally to what advice can we impart to other novice creators out there by looking at what happens in this episode? Well, don't contradict yourself within your own story. Here's the thing. I'm making it sound like this is a no-brainer, and it should definitely be a no-brainer, but actually you'll find, especially in your first draft, that it's very easy to contradict yourself because you're going to have certain ideas for certain characters, and you're especially going to discover your characters as you write them. And it's very, very easy to make them do something that is either outside of character, or maybe you're like, wait a second, no, I want to go in this direction. But the problem is this, that you've already set up a character to go in another direction. So now you have a contradiction where you've set up the character to go one way, but then you've decided for them to go another way, and you haven't given the proper context or explanation. So you'll need to go back and you'll need to edit it. You'll need to edit things in order to make sure that a character is getting properly to where you want him or her to end up. And it's totally fine to completely rewrite a character. Heck, I did it for one book. I completely rewrote the entire cast of characters. I rewrote nearly everything in that book because there were a ton of contradictions. Things were falling apart. So I had to completely remap where I wanted everyone and everything to go. And while it was really difficult, it was so rewarding to do. So watch out for the contradictions within your own story. It's just going to happen naturally because you're going to get some great little ideas. You're going to put them there as you're writing, and unfortunately they don't always line up, and they can very easily fight against each other. This is why editing is very, very important. Another thing that we can learn from this is being consistent with your character arcs. Focus on what was done with Elendil. If you want a character to go through grief or go through happiness or fall in love, things need to be consistent. If you have a character, for instance, let's talk about love, because it's a very easy one to say right here. You have the meet cute. You have the two characters meet, and they're like, oh, that person's cute. I want to get to know them better. And then when you go to the next chapter, they're already dancing the mattress mumbo. There's a ton of context missing, and there's no consistency whatsoever. Or, I mean, that's really kind of a bland example. So let's say this. You have characters, they've got the meet cute. They decide that they're going to hang out a little bit, and eventually it leads to a date. And you're like, ooh, a date. And then a couple chapters later, they're dating other people with no good explanation or reasoning why, but they are dating other people because you wish to create drama and make them realize that they were only ever meant for each other, and so eventually they will find each other again and live together happily ever after the end. Well, you know what? It's actually fun to have that drama and to let characters discover potential romance with others before realizing that they were really meant for the original love interest. But if you're going to do that, you need to properly set that up. You need to make sure that choices are consistent with those characters and everything. Consistency is key. Another important thing to take away is this: you need to have a foundation of understanding. No, this does not mean do a massive info dump to let your audience know everything about your story and its characters, everything about its history and lore, everything about its world building, how the science works, how its society works, cultural norms, magic, languages. No, you actually don't have to explain all of that all in one go. But it is important that you have those things where they are necessary for your story, and that you give just enough to your audience so that way they can better understand things. I will pull an example actually from my book Bleed, Steam, and Steel. One of the things that I absolutely enjoyed doing was creating a steampunk version of Japan, with some slight alterations to how the noble and warrior class worked. For instance, I have it where the samurai class is made up of not simply people who hire themselves out or who are chosen by feudal lords to serve as their warriors and guards, but rather in this steampunk version of Japan, the samurai class is made up of the firstborn of every single family. Regardless if they're male or female, they have to serve within the warrior class. They can do other things besides just be a soldier, but they exist as the core military might for this kingdom should they ever need to go to war. And I give a little brief explanation. I have an entire history set aside for the steampunk version of Japan, but I give you just enough within the story to realize, okay, once upon a time, there were massive wars, they needed lots of soldiers, so boom, they instituted the firstborn law, and now that's just been a thing ever since. And oh, the emperor doesn't like the firstborn law because he's actually a lower born person. He was the thirdborn in the family. So he feels like the firstborn are always looking down on him, and the secondborn likewise. So he wants to do away with these laws and make it more of a meritocracy rather than the order in which you were born. And so you then have this very progressive way of looking at the world versus the very traditionalist way of looking at the world, which is championed by the main character, Asuka, who has to deal with the consequences of her warrior lifestyle. And again, there are just little bits that I put here and there to help give context as to the traditions, the troubles that brings, what kind of pressure Asuka is under, and to help give you some context into why maybe the Emperor doesn't have such a bad idea, but also why the firstborn in resisting the Emperor also have a fairly good argument against him. And that creates the fun conflict and nuance that you want to have in a story, as well as giving you enough of a foundation for understanding that you don't feel lost when you're reading these characters and diving deep into their world. Now then, a lot of this stuff is going to come to you through practice. I have been writing for the Legend of the Ten Lords series now for 8 years. I am currently working on the 4th book for that series. I'm also editing the 3rd book. Oof, tackling 2 books at the same time. That's going to put you through the ringer. In any case, though, I find that even though I've been working on this series for 8 years, I have the master plan and everything like that written out already for where I'm going with this story. I find that I still make a lot of mistakes with continuity, with making sure that character arcs are consistent, and with providing just the right amount of world building to help give foundations to my readers. This takes practice. It takes editing. It takes feedback from other creators. So make sure that you're practicing your craft and that you are seeking for feedback so that way you can properly edit your stories to make them better. So that's all of the advice that I have here for this particular video. There's a whole lot more to still say about the Rings of Power right here. And I know that, again, there's a lot of other very sensational takes on what's going on here, but ultimately, when I look at this episode right here, a lot of things are just simply falling apart because they're not well put together. It's not that the show doesn't have gems or good material to work with. It has it all there. Yes, I would rather that we had gotten a far more lore accurate series. By golly, please give that to me. But if you're going to make original content, write it well. Oh, man. Oh, what more can I say? The one parting thing I can say is this. We have one more episode to go. One more episode. There are so many loose threads still. Yes, I understand. There's supposed to be 4 more seasons, a lot more mystery, a lot more action, a lot more character development. This isn't the end of the story. But here is something to bear in mind. When you're reading a book or you're watching a show, and you come to the end of that book or show, and it's a part of a much larger series, the end of the season needs to wrap up the overarching plot of that season well and tight. For a book is telling a specific arc within the much larger narrative of the series. It needs to wrap it up nice and well. When we look here at what's going on, we have Galadriel and Halbrand riding off to the elves to get medical aid for a guy who's bleeding out of his gut, and they are down just around Mordor and Gondor. Lindon is all the way up on the other side of the continent. Are we just going to magically teleport and somehow just say, yeah, magic, everything's done? What about the conflict between the elves and the dwarves and the Mithril? Or the Balrog underneath the mountain? What about the Númenóreans sailing back? What about Isildur being left behind in Mordor? What the heck is Adar doing? They are again dropping the ball on a very interesting character in Adar and just leaving him to the winds. And what about the Harfoots? What about Meteor Man? What about the cultists? All of these things have been introduced, and one season should bring all of these stories to a satisfactory point where we know where Isildur is and where he's finally going to go as a character. We should finally understand what Adar fully plans to do with the lands of Mordor. We should begin to see the elves gathering around a common cause to defeat evil. We should see plots beginning to take shape amongst the Númenóreans, and not just vague things about favors and conquest and trade. Huzzah! That's very simple stuff that can be said in one sentence and is not necessarily a plot point or a plot arc within the overall story. There's so many things that are just kind of left out there. We don't know anything about the cultists. We're probably not going to learn anything about them. The Harfoots are going to find Meteor Man and be reunited with him, and hooray. What did any of that mean? You could have had that same setup at the end of episode 1 with just now slightly more understanding. In fact, knowing all the stuff that we do know now about the Harfoots, them going after Meteor Man is just a massive contradiction into who they've been established to be, and that now they've decided to turn on a dime because of one good spell and one cheesy speech that was ripped off from Bilbo Baggins and a Fellowship of the Ring sequence that was stolen right out of the Council of Elrond and severely botched by writers who don't know how to write an inspirational scene where characters are bringing all of their different strengths to bear. And that's in part because we still don't even know who these Harfoots are, because we haven't had enough time with them to fully understand them as individuals rather than as dirty, horrible nomads. And what about the pacing for almost everything else? It's all just falling apart. I don't know how they can even wrap up anything in any sort of good way other than be like, haha, we have cliffhangers. Don't you just love our cliffhangers? Look, for a season that is meant to establish everything, you are allowed one, and count them, one cliffhanger. If this show tries to get away with more than one cliffhanger at the end of the next episode, then they've gone too far. It's too many mysteries, and the story will be crushed under the weight of unanswered questions. And people are going to tune out. They're not going to return because they feel like this investment of 8 hours plus of their life has led to nothing but questions, and questions that they're probably not even all that invested or interested in. And with all of these other loose threads, if you do decide to tie them up, they're so loose and flying free in the wind wind that it's going to feel like a Deus Ex Machina contrivance. Oh my gosh. There's other words for what I would say, but I'm not going to say this on this PG-13/PG-13 channel. Ultimately, it's just a bunch of contrivances if they do wrap up all of those loose threads and set characters finally on appropriate character arcs, because they're so loose in the wind as of the penultimate episode. What have we really gained from this episode other than that Galadriel is still right and correct, and that she's still an insufferable character? That is going to be the legacy of this show, and that's a horrifying, despicable thing, because The Lord of the Rings deserves better. Middle-earth deserves better. The legacy of Tolkien deserves better, and the millions of fans who have dedicated any semblance of time to this series deserve better. So yeah, when I look at this here, all I just see is a show falling apart. This is what happens with a first draft. If a first draft does not have enough strength in of itself at the beginning, it will fall apart at the end. And that's okay. That's happened with half of the stuff that I've written. It was a first draft that fell apart at the end. And as Neil Gaiman says, that's what the second draft is there for. The second draft is to take what you wrote and then make it look like you knew what you were doing all along. This requires you to purify what you have right there. Kill the darlings that you need to. Take out the stuff that doesn't belong. Refine the stuff that is good. Discover the things that you need to discover to make your characters and the world and the plot better. It takes time. It takes effort. No first draft is the final story. But when I look here at the Rings of Power, and I know I am sounding like a broken record now saying it, it's all just a first draft. And that is what we're seeing right here. A crumbling story. So, with all that being said, I am going to move on to bigger and better things. I've given you guys 5 recommendations for far better stories than the Rings of Power, and there's plenty of other things beyond that that you can go and enjoy yourselves and your time with. And if you're a novice author looking for more writing advice, you're looking to create one of those bigger and better things, then I highly recommend that you check out our other videos here on our YouTube channel, as well as checking out our podcast episodes found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We have writing exercises for you to check out over at our Pinterest page, and we would love for you to join our growing community of novice authors. Links for all of that and more are down in the description below. And until the next video, y'all, thank you so much for spending your time with us on this adventure that we call writing, and until the next video, tschüss.